our country in line with the ideas that we brought forth in the most recent election. So, from my perspective, I won't speak for very long because I want to listen to your questions and your comments and try and start this off with an appropriate understanding of the things you're facing. But I think it's important to start with the context of our economy. So for those of you who are in those public policy categories of study, you might have noticed that we put forth our fiscal update not that long ago, just a few weeks ago, talking about the Canadian economy and the context that we're currently in. And broadly speaking, it's good news. What we announced was that we expect in the year 2020 to be the second fastest growing economy among G7 countries. We see that that growth is producing positive outcomes for Canadians. We have a very strong employment situation. We've created, together with Canadians, about 1 million new jobs over the last 4 years. We had a jobs report last week which reinforced the fact that that situation is strong. Our unemployment rate is about 5.6%, which is at or about the lowest rate we've seen for the last 40 years. So a very good place to start. Business profits are solid. Wages are growing significantly in our country. And we also have a situation where we have the best balance sheet, the lowest amount of debt as a function of our economy among G7 countries, something that puts us in a strong position. So the starting point is, as I said, positive for the Canadian economy. That said, all of us know that whether it's about geopolitics or whether it's about trade tensions, the world outside our borders is presenting us with challenges. We have to be aware that while we are doing well and expect to be able to continue to do well, there will be issues that come up that are unpredictable. So in that context, we need to make sure that we maintain that strong balance sheet, that we maintain our strong fiscal position so we can deal with the potential for issues that we can't necessarily predict upfront. So my frame always is thinking about that, thinking about the context that we're in, ensuring that we continue to have a strong fiscal position for the future. And that is a starting point for any set of budget deliberations and thinking about what we can do next. And not only do we have challenges internationally, while we talk about a strong economy in Canada, it's obviously not impacting all Canadians in a consistent way. We see that people in the West, in Alberta, in Saskatchewan, or in the East, in Newfoundland and Labrador, are not experiencing the same positive outcomes that we're experiencing in other parts of the country. So we do also need to think about the context of the broader economy and its impact on people. And really that's why we started, after being re-elected in the fall, with the first and I think a very important decision for Canadians. We lowered taxes for middle-class Canadians, impacting people across the country, to continue on the path of making sure that life is affordable, that people can actually deal with the issues and challenges facing themselves and their families. That will be a continuing focus in this budget and during the course of this government. We will be thinking about affordability, about the real day-to-day challenges that Canadians face. But you also saw in the election campaign that we were very concerned with talking about the environment and how we're going to face up to climate change. And I will tell you that that will be an important focus of our budget. It will be an important focus of our government. And I'm anxious to hear your ideas, your concerns, your issues that you see in that regard, because that will be a central focus of our upcoming budget. We'll also focus on issues like health and safety. We talked during the course of the election campaign about the importance of a strong healthcare system to Canadians and what we might need to do to ensure that that continues, and the critical importance of feeling safe for Canadians. So whether it's in Toronto or other parts of the country, the issue of gun control is an important issue, and we will be thinking about how we move forward on that agenda item in the not-too-distant future. So if you have ideas or thoughts on that, we'd obviously be happy to hear them. And of course, we have had, since 2015, a continuing theme of thinking about how we can ensure that we have reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. This is an important long-term objective to deal with some of the challenges that have been left to us by generations before us and ensure that all Canadians have opportunities moving forward. So those are some of the key themes that we will certainly be addressing in our budget. As I said, I'm here mainly, though, to listen to you. We're doing this across the country over the course of the next couple of weeks. We are ensuring that we can get your voices, whether it's today or you can get in touch with us online at Your Budget, or in any way you can see that you can connect with the Federal Department of Finance. We want to make sure that we incorporate the things that are important for Canadians. And it's not only about today and this budget, but it's on our ongoing ability to make sure that we are addressing issues and concerns. So thank you very much for being here. And again, Mohammed, thank you very much for being here this morning when I'm sure there's lots of other things that you have to do as the president of the university. And with that, we'll move to the next stage of this morning.
Great. Thank you, Minister. Well, welcome, everybody. My name's Sam. I work here at the Ryerson Leadership Lab, and my job today is to moderate this discussion and get all your questions. So get thinking about your ideas for the budget or questions you'd like to ask the Minister, and we'll be passing the microphone around shortly, but I'll take the liberty of sort of kicking it off. So maybe let's start with process. So what is it like to put together a federal budget, and how do these ideas that come out of the pre-budget consultations feed into that process?
Well, it's a very important frame for us to start with. Obviously, a federal budget is a pretty big thing that we focus on. It's a budget of $340 billion for all Canadians. There are many considerations we need to take into account. So typically the process includes us going out, as we're doing this week with pre-budget consultations. I also go out to all of my colleagues in Cabinet to ask them for issues that are facing their departments. That's going on at the same time. And we then take a look, of course, at the key commitments that we've made to Canadians in our election campaign to think about how we best move forward on those to actually follow through in a way that would be consistent with the election results. So those three things are on our mind. Underneath those, we have the regular day-to-day issues that we face as we govern the country. Things like making sure that we have important infrastructure going on in a city like Toronto around housing. Things like making sure that our borders are secure, that we have enough ability to get you through airport security lines rapidly. So there's those underlying issues that are always of importance as well. But hearing the themes that you bring out this morning, finding out how consistent they are across the country. So if we have a consistent theme across the country, it's very helpful for us because we then start to understand what problems we might need to be addressing.
Great. And so this budget is obviously going to be a bit different than your first four when you had a majority mandate and that you now have to pass this budget through a minority parliament. How do you plan to work with the opposition parties or hear their ideas and take that into consideration when you're building the budget?
Well, it's my first time on that front. It will of course present a new set of issues for us, but I think one way to think about it is a positive set of issues because listening to people that are in other parties that were legitimately elected in the region that they were in, we get a voice that we need to consider. Similarly, as we've seen over the course of the last couple of years, we have issues with, as I mentioned, very different economic outcomes in different parts of the country. So we need to listen to different regions about the challenges that they're facing. So, I think it does mean that we need to be very conscious about considering those issues. But in terms of our overall goals, they don't change. We are going to move forward on the issues that Canadians asked us to move forward on. We need to continue to think about the environment and climate change. We need to continue to think about the challenges that people face in terms of higher expenses, like the expenses that all of you are facing in education as a good example. We need to think about health and safety because those are continuing issues of real importance. And I think we'll see in many cases, a common point of view from other parties in Parliament and, different areas of emphasis perhaps, but a common point of view from different regions of the country.
All right. And so you touched on climate change a couple of times, so maybe I'll just pick up on that theme. Your government has acknowledged that the actions taken to date are not enough to meet our 2030 emissions goals and have indicated you're prepared to take new measures. At the same time, from the environmental crowd have been criticized for, moving forward with the pipeline, Trans Mountain pipeline. So are you looking for ideas through this budget consultation on how to meet our emissions goals? And do you have some ideas of your own that you plan to move forward? And just walk us through how you're wrestling with this challenge.
We do obviously have a number of things that we're already thinking about, some of which we spoke about during the election campaign. I think that as we think about the goals of meeting our 2030 targets and our 2050 targets, both which are significant and challenging, we need to think about whether we have enough already there or whether there's more that can be done. We know that we on the one hand, believe that we should expect to get a fair price for our resources, and that is something that we've said makes sense given the current reality of our economy and the global economy. But at the same stage, we need to be focusing on how we actually change the outcome. We think that the pricing of pollution is the most fundamental economic lever that we can use in that regard. Obviously, it was a big fight in the last election campaign. We will continue to focus on that, and we'll be thinking about other ways that we can change our consumption habits, change our carbon intensity so that we can actually prove that we can meet those two targets. We intend on doing that, and I'm not saying that that is an easy challenge. It won't all be solved in the course of one budget, but it is something that I think Canadians and frankly the world is seeing that we need to move forward on. I've seen it demonstrated in my role as Minister of Finance. I've written more checks for fires and floods than any other finance minister before me, and those numbers continue to go up. It's real, the costs are real, and the implications for all of us, including especially the younger people in this room, are real. So we'll be moving forward, and there will be criticism in terms of our approach to recognizing today and tomorrow. But we think that we've got an approach that can work.
Great. So maybe I'll ask one more and then we'll turn it over to the audience. But I was chatting a bit before with these folks, and many of them brought up student debt. And your campaign, you promised significant increases to student grants and better repayment assistance. So they want to know, when can they count on those? Will it be in this budget cycle? Do you know?
I like that, when people ask me what's going to be in the budget in advance. We've been focused on this issue from the very first day in office. We significantly increased student grants for lower income and middle income students in our very first budget in 2016. We've moved forward to reduce the interest costs on student debt significantly, which provides advantage for all students holding student debt. That said, we know that costs are going up. We were discouraged that the Ontario government took some actions that makes it harder for people to finance their education in the course of the last year, because we don't think that that's a positive direction. We've made those views known. So we'll continue to be thinking about how we can move forward in this regard. I can't promise exactly what will be in one budget versus another, but I think as you look at a roadmap for what our government intends to do, the best way to think about that roadmap is to look at our campaign platform, because that is what we got elected on. And it now falls to us to think about the priorities and the implications of doing those at a certain point in time, including, and I think people here will respect the fact that we always do need to think about that fiscal track. I mean, part of the job is being responsible and ensuring that we are prepared for tomorrow. And if we have a challenge tomorrow that we can't predict, we need to be ready for that. So it's always a balancing act, which is why I'm not going to answer your question directly.
All right. Fair enough. Did you have a question?
Hi, my name's Cindy. My question was, what is the current public debt to GDP in Canada, and what's the projection for the upcoming 4 years? And my ongoing question would be, would you compromise public investments to keep low inflation?
Among the things that we have said are critically important are two. We believe we need to invest in your future. So that means invest in things like infrastructure that produce enhanced ability to be successful in the future. And we need to do it in a fiscally responsible way. So translated into real person speak, That means, we are going to continue to work with the provinces to make those investments in infrastructure. We have very low interest rates right now, which enable that. In fact, the cost of that, we think in many cases, is less than the added productivity, so it's a very positive time to make investments. And in terms of the debt to GDP, what we've said is we want to continue to reduce the debt as a function of our overall GDP. So thinking about that as a math problem, it means that the growth in the economy has to be more than the amount of the debt that you put on. So we are right now at about 31%, and our intent is to continue to reduce that debt as a function of our economy over time. That's the commitment. And that 31%, to put it in context, because what does that mean for average people? Well, in terms of G7 countries, United States, Germany, France, England, Italy, and Japan, and ourselves, it's not only the lowest, but it's less than half of the average. So we are much, much lower than anyone else. So it's like if you were on a street and everyone else had a mortgage that was more than twice as large as yours. And that provides you with the ability to invest in, making sure the sidewalks are good out front. And that's the context. It also means that in the face of a challenge, if all of a sudden you don't have income, you've got the ability to figure out what you do in that context. And we have a better ability to do that than any of those other G7 countries. So it's a positive place to be. And we just want to make sure that we don't lose that positive advantage at a time where investments make sense. Because it makes sense. Any of you doing finance in this room know that when interest rates are as low as they are, investments are much, much more attractive. And that's the context we're in.
Hi, my name is Samantha. I saw that you had condemned sort of how low we are in terms of globally being like a gender pay gap from females to males. And I was wondering if there's anything that could be done to address that within the budget in a way, because I saw that you were saying that something has to be done to aid that gap.
This is a really important issue, not only for the women in this audience, but for everyone in this audience. We have both an issue around doing the right thing, but also a demographic issue. We in Canada are facing the reality that we are going to have fewer and fewer working people and more people that are retired. So having people being very successful in the workforce is critically important. Currently, there's two ways of looking at the gender gap. One is to look at the equal pay for equal work issue. So a woman and a man side by side, around 88 cents on the dollar for a woman versus a man. Or women and men generally, which is more like 67 cents on the dollar because there's differences in terms of part-time work versus full-time work. So either way you look at it, it's not appropriate. We want to make sure that women have equal incentives to be working full-time, if that's what they choose to do, just like men should have that same incentive if that's what they choose to do. And we want to make sure it's fair when they get there. So we've done a number of things in this regard, and I think there's more to do. So one of the things we did in our last budget is we put in place a sort of a use it or lose it parental leave. So for the second partner, they have the ability to take time off, and the second partner is often a man. And so that pushes men to take parental leave, which makes the burden of having children more equally balanced between the male and the female. We think that gets at it. We've said other things, though. We've said we need to think about how we create role models. So we focus very much in the federal government and all of our agencies in thinking about diversity, all kinds of diversity at board and leadership level. We've pushed corporations in board to make sure they have diversity, in particular diversity around gender. But in answer to your question, I think there will always be more to do. If companies don't act in a way that we expect, then what we're saying to these companies, and the reason you're hearing me say that is I want the companies to hear that we're saying that if you're not acting, then we're going to have to, because we all need to have this as an outcome. So that will be a continuing area of focus for our government. It has been for 4 years. I think we've made progress, but there's a reasonable argument that much more progress needs to be made, and we need to stay on it.
Hi, my name's Eric, and especially since the election, the question of collaboration and relationships between federal, provincial, and territorial governments has kind of been a hot topic. And I'm aware that different governments have different strategies, whether it's the federal one with strengthening the middle class, or for example, the Ontario government with red tape reduction and job creation. Two strategies that I think a lot of people might think could work together, but in the past we've seen that relationship doesn't always work well together. My question for you is, especially in the case with the minority government now, what strategies are you exploring during these pre-budget consultations to strengthen those relationships between the federal government and provincial and territorial ones to have everyone's strategies succeed and take as much as you can from each province and territory?
I think, you know, in a minority parliament and with provinces speaking out loudly, it focuses our attention on issues that we've already been thinking about. So the idea of collaborating with provinces and territories is not a new issue. You know, in the very first year we got into office, my area of focus was enhancing the Canada Pension Plan, and in order to do that, we needed to get all the provinces on board. So we worked with all the provinces and got to an enhancement in the Canada Pension Plan, which will very positively impact all the young people in this room, because your pension will be significantly higher when you finish your work than it would have been otherwise. And all 10 provinces came on board. So collaboration is possible, sometimes challenging, but absolutely possible. I think that our goal now is to figure out how to work given the different political situation, different provinces. I would tell you that we were working hard to have a good relationship with the Ontario government. We don't agree on everything by any stretch, but you know, I work together with my counterpart to try to get through issues and challenges. And similarly, you know, if you think about some of the big areas of mutual opportunity, it's infrastructure funding, as an example, where we're all trying to make sure that we have the capacity to solve challenges in a city like Toronto. Similarly, out west, as we think about, you know, how do we work together with governments that might have, on paper, somewhat different outlooks. And one of the things we put in the last budget was an investment in a clean resource network, so investment in technology to lower emissions from energy. And that we think is really important. So that's an area of potential mutual opportunity that gets at our goal of lowering carbon intensity, gets at the goal of you know, getting engineers that are talented in a place like Alberta where there's availability, working on the challenge. So that'll be an area of real focus. All of my colleagues are on it. Obviously, the Prime Minister made it a particular area of focus by putting one minister, Chrystia Freeland, on this pretty much exclusively. And I feel confident that we will make progress.
Hi, my name is Lourdes. Sorry, I'm just going to pull up my question.
So it's going to be a hard one.
Well, it depends. So minority governments haven't historically lasted the full term or the full 4 years, yet they have been the most productive and perhaps the most stable. In crafting the federal budget, how do you plan for these realities? One where you serve the full term and one where you perhaps run short on time to implement the commitments your party has made in regards to environment and reconciliation.
I think starting with your observation around minority parliaments, there's every reason to think that we can work together to get things done. So I think we start off with the inclination to work with other parties to try and move forward on areas of importance for Canadians. And the two areas that you pointed out, the area around climate change and reconciliation, certainly we saw a strong majority of Canadians telling us that the environment and climate change are critical priorities. So we think that we have a mandate together with other parties in government to move forward on issues around environment and climate change. And on reconciliation, the same is true. So I think that we seek to work with the people that will work with us on those issues. I can't predict whether this government will be a government that's, you know, 2 years or 4 years. That's an unknown. What I can say is that we need to work to follow through on the things that we promised we would do. And that, I think, in terms of trust in government, in terms of trust in the fact that we're doing what we said we were going to do, that's our approach. And if it turns out that one or a collection of parties don't support us as we go about that, well, then we'll have to face that reality and ask Canadians what they want us to do. But I'm hopeful that that won't happen in the near term, and I'm optimistic that there's enough common ground that we can move forward in a way that is conciliatory and collaborative and effective. So we'll see.
Switch it up. Hi, Bill. I've heard the environment come up a lot today, which is really really great, and I'm wondering what concrete steps the government's thinking of taking in order to meet our 2030, 2050 targets in terms of infrastructure, in terms of jobs, in terms of moving away from carbon in our economy.
Well, this is important that you all lean in on this. We've talked about some already concrete steps that we continue to believe are critically important. The issue around pricing pollution, which is still being contested by a number of provinces, we are moving forward with that because we think it's the most economically efficient way for us to deal with our carbon emissions. We continue to think about how we can encourage people to move to lower impact vehicles. You've seen us make movements in that regard. We put a specific platform issue out around people being able to retrofit their homes so they can actually reduce the intensity of emissions from the purchase of energy for homes. To put it in context, homes are about 12% of our carbon emissions, so it's not trivial in any way. So that's an important way that we can deal with that. But there are going to be new issues that we need to think about. Similarly, on the other side, we're going to need to think about dealing with the impact of climate change mitigation. So we talked in the campaign about how people can insure against floods, how we can make sure that people are in a situation where they actually have some capacity to deal with issues that are coming up. I think we have to work on both those sides of the equation at the same time and do it in a way that helps people to understand that more action sooner is better, and that is not just up to government, that is up to everybody. It's up to government to identify and try and find ways to get people to make the decisions that are going to help us all, but it's a broader societal issue that we're facing up to.
Hey, Bo. So there's been a lot of talk about a looming recession and how it could be worse than like anything we've seen to date. And I was just wondering, with interest rates already so low, what monetary tools the government thinks they have in hand to deal with it.
Well, when we say there's been a lot of talk, let's just identify this. So when we did our fiscal update, the way I do it is I ask outside private sector economists to give their projection of what's going to happen in the economy. There were 14 outside private sector economists that gave their projections, and all 14 gave us a projection of growth. So none of the 14 were projecting recession. The fact that some politicians who are not in those professional economist categories are projecting something doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. So we just need to address the situation. And I want to say that specifically because confidence matters. People having confidence in the future that they can make investments in a situation where we have low interest rates matters. That actually is an input into a positive economy. So we do all have an interest in understanding what's going on and understanding the reality of those challenges, those trade challenges I mentioned at the upfront, but also the fact that we are in a good economic situation, and that good economic situation allows us to make investments in the future. That would be my broad response in the situation of low interest rates. Obviously, the response to any economic challenges is likely to be different than if we had high interest rates. Historically, when the economies face challenges, the central banks have reduced interest rates, but given that interest rates are already at a low rate, that tool is not there in the same way, which means that the response to economic challenge is much more about investments that the government can make, what's called fiscal approaches, and that's why we need to always maintain a strong balance sheet, always maintain the ability to make those investments, which is why that's one of the key objectives that I'm working towards and that the Prime Minister has asked me to work towards in how I move forward with the budget.
Maybe I'll take the liberty of asking a follow-up. Some are suggesting that if there is a recession and you do a stimulus package, to make it Canada's first green stimulus package, like exclusively dedicated to green investments. What do you think about that?
I think that's a hypothetical that I won't answer, in the sense of, when we have a positive economy, we should focus on where are we making investments in the case of that positive economy. But the question really is, should we be investing in a green environmental approach to growing our economy? The answer is unequivocally yes. So again, in the current situation, interest rates are low. It provides the opportunity to invest, so we can continue to invest. Investing in things that are going to improve our long-term approach to dealing with climate challenges are important. Investments in mitigating the challenges around the impact of climate change are important. So that is our approach going forward. And happily, we are not having to address the first part of your question because our economy is strong.
Fair enough. We have time for one more. Any burning question? All right.
Hi, Bill. So my question is that so in the previous budgets, there has been significant controversy with the feeling of that the way funding is given to the private sector has been unfair and very partisan, solely given to supporters, and that has been what's causing significant, really big division within our country. And I was wondering whether you're planning to sort of create a more nonpartisan way in order to offer funding to businesses who may not be Liberal Party supporters, and as well as whether there will be, and if not, what will be the way in order to sort of offer less corrupt ways in order to offer businesses like in order to offer businesses something like a Loblaws package. Thank you.
Well, let me say that I completely reject the premise of your question. I think you're actually completely wrong and have, in my estimation, no data to even support that. So in terms of our approach to growing our economy, it's thinking about the issues and challenges that we might face. I'm unaware of this idea that you have that there are companies that are in one political situation versus another. I've never actually come across those companies that are one party or another party. Most companies try to serve the interests of their shareholders and their broader stakeholder group, and certainly would be irresponsible to those groups if they were partisan in any way. So the premise of your question is flawed. We will continue to think about the way that we deal with our economy, that deals with challenges. When challenges come up or opportunities come up, we will take them on their face. So if there is a challenge with a company that is in particular financial issue that's going to deal with, encourage significant unemployment, then we'll always think about that because we care about jobs. If there is an opportunity to invest in environmentally sound projects together with private sector organizations, then we will think about that because we want to get those outcomes. But we will always do that in a way that has a fair process and a transparent process, so that people can understand why we're doing that and the impact we're seeking to achieve and who we are trying to partner with.
All right. Thank you, Minister, for coming today, and thanks everyone for the great questions. We always appreciate you visiting Ryerson, and would encourage everybody here and across the country to participate in these consultations for the upcoming budget. And thanks very much for your time.
Thank you. And if I can just say again, thank you to everyone for being here. We are keenly interested in your ideas, your observations, and don't hesitate to be in touch with us if you have things that you didn't get an opportunity to say today or ideas that you think could be particularly impactful. So thanks and good luck at school.
All right.
Well, good morning. Thank you very much for being here at our pre-budget consultations. Bonjour, c'est un plaisir d'être ici à Ryerson University pour nos consultations pre-budgétaires. Happy to be here with Adam Vaughan, my colleague from Spadina, Fort York, and respond to your questions.
So one question, one follow-up. Report result, please say who you work for.
Good morning, Minister. Simon Dingley from CBC National News. The Evening Standard in the UK is reporting that Canada's agreed to pay for security costs for the Duke and Duchess of Sussex if they agree to live in Canada. Will Canadians be paying for the security of the royal couple?
Thank you very much for that question. We obviously are always looking to make sure that as a member of the Commonwealth that we play a role. We have not had any discussions on that subject at this time.
Have you estimated at all, though, what it could cost to provide security if they do indeed come to Canada?
No, we haven't spent any time thinking about this issue.
Je vais le même commentaire en français pour Radio-Canada aussi.
Nous voulons toujours être une bon partenaire des pays Commonwealth, mais en ce moment, nous n'avons pas considéré l'enjeu.
Good morning, Victoria Gibson, iPolitics. On the campaign trail this fall, the Prime Minister promised $6 billion over 4 years for the pharmacare program. That's drastically less than the Parliamentary Budget Officer has estimated will cost to implement this program. I believe his 2020 projection was more than $20 billion. So are you open at this point to pledging more money than that $6 billion number in your next budget?
We were very clear during the course of the election campaign that we think it's critically important that we deal with the challenge around pharmacare. We need to deal with the costs of our pharmacare system. We've taken some measures in that regard already, and we need to deal with the fact that a significant number of Canadians don't have access to pharmaceuticals. In that regard, we are committed to a universal approach to pharmacare. We know that we need to work with the provinces to make that happen. So in order to get that delivered provincially, it means working with the provinces, and we intend on moving forward in that regard. The financing, of course, will be related to the ability to work together with those provinces. So it's premature for me to tell you what the exact approach from a financial standpoint will be until we make progress with the provinces in this regard.
And on that subject with the provinces, can you give an update on your thinking at this point about possible changes to the stabilization fund or any other sort of financial relief for provinces like Alberta and Saskatchewan that have been asking for it?
We've had some discussions with the provinces. I had all of the finance ministers in Ottawa in December to talk about issues and challenges. There was a consensus at that meeting that we should take a look at the approach to the stabilization fund, which deals with provinces going through economic challenges. And right now, my officials at the Department of Finance are looking at those issues so that we can consider how we might move forward. We want to make sure the program continues to effectively deal with these challenges. Hasn't been reviewed for a very long time, for more than a couple of decades, so we think that's appropriate. I don't have any details as of yet because we're in the analysis phase, but I expect we will have details in the not-too-distant future.
I'm Kashish from the on-campus newspaper, The Eye Opener, and when Prime Minister Trudeau was here in University of Toronto last, he promised $1,200 more in grants per year to students. With the current deficit rising, are you willing to keep up that promise? And if so, and if yes, where is the money coming from?
Well, thank you. We, as I mentioned in our talk just now, we've been concerned around the issue of the challenge for students to be able to afford post-secondary education really from day one. So you'll see from our government a continuing focus in this area. The kind of increases we made in student grants back in 2016 were important. The kinds of changes we made around the cost of student debt most recently are important. They'll have a big impact, about $2,000 less to service debt for the average student in the course of his or her life. But we've said we think there's more to do in this regard. So I'm right now, as you know, looking at how we can move forward on our budget in 2020, considering our campaign commitments, considering this issue, and we'll have more to say on that in the near future. Certainly what I can tell you is that we'll always be thinking about our fiscal responsibilities, at the same time making sure that the future of Canada is strong, and the future of Canada includes students who are able to get their education to be strong participants in our economy.
Another important issue for Ryerson students is the climate crisis. So how serious are you to honor the Paris Agreement? So I know that the climate and the economy have to go hand in hand, but keeping that in mind, how are you going to make sure that one does not supersede the other?
We heard from Canadians, and we have been focused on the issue of how we deal with climate change and meet up to our continuing commitments to ensure our economy is strong, but also our environment is there for the future. You'll see us moving forward and talking about how we can actually meet up to our 2030 commitments and how we can get to a situation in 2050 that is neutral. These are challenging targets, to be sure, but they're important, and you'll hear more about them in the very near future. And we appreciate your ideas and your thoughts as students and young people who are going to be around to face these challenges for longer than I am.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lastly,
You can turn it down. You can.
Yeah. So Bill C-92 began January 1st, but there are concerns about funding the implementation of this bill. Can you speak to that at all? When can people expect to see very tangible promises and allocations of funding to implement this?
It's the Indigenous Child Care.
Okay. I always, when people use the acronym on the bill, I always want to make sure I'm getting it right before I answer the question. We, as you know, have been focused on how we deal with the challenges facing Indigenous peoples in Canada from day one. The issue around ensuring that we have appropriate funding for children, Indigenous children in particular, is important. You'll hear more of that in the near future, but I don't have anything to report on at this moment. We're considering this as a government. Merci. Thank you very much.